With the recent ban in Australia on minors on social media, I wanted to dive into a couple of articles and try and understand this whole mess and understand the reason why the government has gone this way. And it's a bit more complex or complicated, one or the other, than you think. Smartphones and social media toxic for children under 14, psychologist Jonathan Haidt says. So the article goes on to say children's widespread use of smartphones and tablets has been labelled insanity by the United States social psychologist, who says Australia is leading the way with its bold new social media laws. Jonathan Haidt is part of a movement that aims to roll back the phone-based childhood, which he says is hurting child and adolescent mental health. I'll have to agree with him with that. During an interview with Sarah Kowalski on ABC Listens Conversation podcast, Dr. Haidt said more governments, including the United States Congress, should follow Australia's lead and mandate that 16 be the minimum age for accessing social media. We have minimum ages for about 4 reasons: traffic, sex, extreme violence, addiction, and physical danger. But once your kid gets a smartphone and social media, they've got all 4. This is insanity, he says. That's true. They've got access to everything. We have overprotected our children in the real world and underprotected them online. That is so true. We're always worried about our kids going outside, and a lot of kids are inside kids now, especially these days. But we don't actually monitor them on their devices. So maybe they're better off actually being outside. The danger might be less. The world that we have is completely toxic for children. It's double the rates of depression, anxiety, suicide, and self-harm. Wow. Data from the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare shows that since 2011, the rate that 12 to 17-year-olds have been hospitalized for psychiatric care has almost doubled, a trend mostly attributed to increases among girls. Wow. I have heard this before, that the rate of depression and suicide and everything else, and there's like a chart and you can see the rate of it going up in minors, but in females a lot more than males. So this is a problem. Clinical psychologist Rachel Murray is the director of the University of Technology Sydney's Kidman Centre, which offers mental health treatment and research for young people. Dr. Murray says Australia's major mental health organisations argue that the emerging longitude studies don't support the notion that social media is causing an increase in mental health problems for most young people. Oh, okay. Right. The science isn't close to settled on this, she said. In many ways, it's leaning in the other direction, that there is not a great deal of evidence to support poor mental health results from smartphone use. Interesting. A current narrative blaming social media for the youth mental health crisis is an oversimplification, and for a long time, the literature has been very clear. It is a combination of factors. So this is the chart here. Overnight mental health hospitalization for youths aged between 12 and 17. Okay, so I'm assuming she's trying to argue that there are other factors that are contributing to this, which could make sense. I mean, you can't just assume that, okay, because social media was introduced at this point in time and that's when a lot of problems happen, but it could be other causes that are contributing to these issues. So yes, the jury might still be out on that. Collective action needed. Dr. Murray acknowledges that for some children, social media has had a catastrophic impact and that change is needed to minimize further harm. I personally have heard many terrible stories in my line of work, she said. As far as I'm concerned, one lost life is too many. Agreed. Regardless of whether the majority are not impacted, all parties seem to agree that a more proactive stance from the social media companies is an integral part of the solution. And I agree with that. I think that you can't always just rely on the government to just step in and say, okay, we're going to put a ban on this. I think the government should put it to these social media companies and say, hey, you guys need to fix this problem. What are you guys going to put in place to prevent this issue? And if we're happy with it, no bans on your social media company because you've implemented something. But If we're not happy with it, then you need to do more. So it shouldn't just be the government just going, all social media is banned from 16 and below. I don't really agree with that, because some social media companies are kind of responsible, like YouTube. They're fairly responsible when it comes to this sort of stuff. And if you look at the past of where YouTube has come from, they've had stances on many issues, especially surrounding children. That's why there's kids YouTube these days. By governments mandating a minimum age for social media use, Professor Haydet says parents can feel supported to set tighter screen time boundaries, and children and teens are less likely to feel excluded from online peer groups. There you go. Anyway, I'm not going to go into this whole article, but I will move on to the other article that I found interesting that kind of ties in with this issue. Five Eyes Nations sound unprecedented alarm on shocking teenage terror threat. The Five Eyes multi-nation intelligence sharing network has sounded an unprecedented alarm about the threat of young people being radicalized by extremist online content, as authorities warn Australian children as young as 12 are at risk of becoming terrorists. That is crazy. In a first-of-its-kind intervention, security and law enforcement authorities from Australia, the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, and New Zealand said in a joint paper that they were battling to combat an alarming rise in young people who support extremist causes or plan terrorist attacks. Wow, that is crazy. As young as 12? Mike Burgess, the Director General of domestic spy agency ASIO, said that around 1 in 5 of ASIO's priority counter-terrorism cases now involve young people. 1 in 5. Crazy. In every one of the terrorist attacks, disruptions, and suspected terrorist incidents in Australia this year, the alleged perpetrator was a young person, Burgess said. As a parent, the number is shocking. As an intelligence officer, the numbers are sobering. A whole of society response will be needed to keep citizens safe, the Five Eyes report said, as the Joint Chiefs of Intelligence urged parents, teachers, healthcare and social workers to be alert for any signs of radicalization among young people. This is crazy. And this ties in with the previous article I was reading in regards to putting a ban on social media from the age of 16 and below. So yep, the government of Australia has obviously put that in place, but it ties in with this. It's also to reduce radicalization and to stop terrorist acts, especially kids under 16 or 16 and under. That's crazy that they're getting radicalized. If kids 16 years and under are getting radicalized from social media, that's a red flag that things have to change with these social media applications. And if the individual social media application or social media network is not doing anything, then what else can you do? You have to ban them. Put things in place or ban them. The authorities presented a case of a 16-year-old Australian who advocated attacks on people of non-white appearance and urged others to prepare for upcoming race war to defend the white race. So these radicalizations can come from any side, including white supremacists. And that's what it seems to be in this instance. So this is crazy. It goes on to say this included discussing carrying out a mass killing offshore, posting about live streaming a shooting on Facebook, requesting assistance in bomb making, praising mass shooters, and suggesting the targeting of high-profile enemies, the paper said. Investigators found the teenager was socially isolated with few real-world relationships. So there you go. Risk of violence was so serious that the authorities charged the minor with advocating terrorism and urging violence against members or groups. The teenager was sentenced to an 18-month term imprisonment and later released into the community on an interim control order. So there you go. He's back out there. In a separate case, authorities discussed a 14-year-old in Australia who said on Snapchat that they planned to conduct a school shooting at their high school and had access to firearms and explosives. Wow. See, and this is where I guess there's a balance that needs to be had with this as well, because if that wasn't on social media, then they wouldn't have found out about it. So it is sort of a way to keep tabs on people as well at the same time, because who knows if someone's just going to do something regardless because they're a nut job. You don't know. But because of social media, sometimes you can prevent things because people don't realize that people are watching your social media activity, especially when you say and do certain things. Authorities searched the home of the child who had a history of racism towards Asian and Indigenous people, seizing tactical vests, ballistic helmet, and extremist drawings. Wow. The child was charged with advocating terrorism and using a carriage service to make threats and sentenced to a good behaviour bond, so nothing, because they're 14 years old. Australian Federal Police Commissioner Reece Kershaw said he was concerned by the increasing number of children being investigated by the Joint Counter-Terrorism Teams, which comprise federal and state police as well as ASIO. The article goes on to say, since the start of 2020, counter-terrorism teams have investigated and conducted operational activity against 35 individuals aged 17 years or younger, with the youngest aged 12 years old, he said. Wow. More than half of the young people investigated have been charged with either federal or state offences, Kershaw said. Kershaw said that propaganda videos shared on platforms such as Discord, Telegram, and TikTok were a major cause of concern. Law enforcement sources were not authorized to speak publicly, said the 13-year-old's disturbing behavior was disrupted before it became dangerous, with interventions put in place to prevent further radicalization. Jeez. And then it goes on to say the Albanese government last week passed legislation to enforce minimum age limit of 16 years for social media, saying regulation was needed to protect young people from online harm. So there's a lot more to these laws coming in than just protecting kids from self-harm and mental health and things like that. It's also to prevent them from radicalization. So we live in a different world and it's very complex, but these are the issues that we need to tackle. How you tackle them? I think it should be on the social media companies. And if the social media companies can't prevent these issues or put in place things to prevent these issues, that's when the government should step in and not before. But that's just my opinion. Anyway, I thought this was an interesting story, an interesting topic. Feel free to give your thoughts below. See ya.